Marixa Salgado, and I am the Regional Program Director for Central Florida East and also the Interim Co-Director of Care Services. Today's webinar on stress management and self-care is the fourth and last Caring for the Caregiver webinar in our series for this year. This webinar series is sponsored by Mitsubishi Tanabe Pharma America. We welcome all of you and want you to know that this is an interactive space for you to ask relevant questions and commentary. Our presenter today is Yalily Smith, AKA Lily. Lily is a licensed clinical social worker who has experience working with ALS patients and their families. Lily also has an independent practice with other therapists. Please turn off your microphones when you are not speaking to eliminate any background noises. Thank you so much, everybody. And Lily, it's all yours.
Oh, hello, everybody. I hope you can all hear me okay. I think I'm connected now.
Yes, you are.
Good?
We hear you
Yes?
fine. Yeah, we hear
Awesome.
you.
Thank you so much for joining and for taking an interest in your self-care, especially as a caregiver, and in learning more about your, just staying healthy and being able to continue the incredible journey of caring for your loved ones. So this is very interactive. I do have some speaking points, but if you're interested in talking, asking questions, especially if you find yourself having certain difficulties on a day-to-day basis that you want to discuss and you want me to touch base on, please feel free to let me know, and I'd be happy to answer your questions or your concerns along the way. So no problems with that. The way that I'm actually was thinking of starting, and again, you can stop me at any time, is by actually discussing what are some of the signs of burnout, what are some of the signs of depression, anxiety that you may or may not know about as you're caring for your loved one. And there's 8 right off the top of my head that I was able to think of as I've worked with chronically ill patients and their loved ones. And the first one that comes to mind right away is an almost persistent feeling of lethargy. Like you're just tired. You're tired. When you wake up in the morning and you're tired before you go to sleep, you're just tired often. Eating more than you should, or eating too little, like forgetting to eat, becoming too easily distracted to remember food, or eating because you feel a sense of like, well, I'm just always picking at things or always eating, or I sit down and I overeat. That's also a sign of anxiety and burnout. The next one is constant thoughts of worry, constant negative thoughts, and catastrophic thoughts. And so I want to talk about that in particular because, of course, when we're caring for somebody with a very complicated illness like ALS, of course, you're always worried. Today, they were fine. Tomorrow, they might need to go to the hospital. It's such an uncertain life that worry is a constant thing. But are you able to manage the worry to where you can still operate on a day-to-day basis without the worry consuming you and becoming something that perhaps is not always realistic to your situation, but instead rather catastrophic? Are you able to see both sides? Hey, we're okay and things are manageable right now, but we do prepare for the possibility of changes to come, or is it always, well, what if this happens? Well, they just, I'm sure this is going to happen, and I'm sure we're going to end up in the hospital, and I'm sure that things are going to get bad. And so are you able to manage the worry in a way that you can balance being stable with being aware of the situation that you're living on a day-to-day basis. And another thing is, do you feel like you can't stop constantly worrying? Even if things are okay, even if it's been okay for several weeks or months, you just can't stop looking for that next shoe to drop and that next bad thing to happen. And it consumes your thoughts, and it makes it hard to sleep, and it makes it hard to focus, and it makes it hard to make decisions. The next one, questioning yourself and your self-worth.
On.
I'm so sorry. Somebody spoke. Okay. Questioning yourself or your self-worth. Feeling like maybe you put yourself down often, or you question whether you're a good enough caretaker, a good enough spouse, good enough parent, or child, because sometimes we have children taking care of their parents. Sometimes we have spouses taking care of their loved ones, their parents or their significant other. You start to question your role and your worth as a person in that role. I could have done better. I could have tried harder. I'm being selfish because I took a few minutes to myself and I wasn't available the entire time. Those kinds of thoughts where you start to literally define yourself by your ability to provide for this particular person in your life. Forgetting things like personal needs, again, back with the eating, hygiene, forgetting if you took a shower that day, forgetting if you brushed your teeth, brushed your hair, forgetting if you made that appointment that you needed to make, or an appointment passes that you were already waiting for several months, but you were so distracted that you actually forgot that you were supposed to go to an appointment for yourself. Now, of course, for your loved one, you're always like on task and you get it every time and you always remember and you're on top of it. But are you able to be just as diligent about yourself? And then the last two are you having a hard time sleeping and staying asleep? There is a pretty common situation that happens with caregivers that they become very hyper alert when they have to take care of a loved one. And that hyper awareness and that hyper alertness makes it so that the smallest noise, the smallest movement, anything at all will wake you up. And so it's really, really difficult to stay asleep and to sometimes fall asleep, especially if you're having those negative thoughts, those ruminating thoughts in your head of like being worried. So are you able to actually get a night's rest? And if you can't sleep at night, if you can't actually get a night's rest, are you able to catch up with a small nap during the day? Or are you living in a state of constant hyperactivity in your brain where you're always tired and you're always under rested? And then just the last one is just being very easily distracted, having a hard time if you have to manage multiple tasks at once, having a hard time keeping track of all of those tasks, and even feeling like, is there something wrong with me? Is this a medical condition that I'm developing? Am I becoming too forgetful? It's most of the time, if you are struggling with managing anxiety because of burnout, because of overwhelming amount of stress in your life, you will very easily forget simple things. And it literally will feel like you're going crazy. Like, how did I forget that food in the microwave that I haven't eaten all day? And I put that plate of food in the microwave, and I come back 3 hours later and I had completely forgotten. So, it's things like those. Do you guys have any questions right now?
You're going
Okay.
to tell us how to get, you're going to tell us how to get these things situated. Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can mark off all of them.
So I will definitely help you guys. We'll go through all of them and we'll talk about resources and coping tools that you can use. Something that I want to talk about actually, in addition to that, is how it becomes compounded. So let's add on to all of that, the holidays. And so now you have the stress of everyday life, and then there's the holidays. And a lot of us living in wonderful sunny Florida, we have the family members that want to come and visit because they want to run away from the snow. And, typically they want to land in our homes. And so a lot of us may be responsible for also catering to family that are coming. We may be the household where the meal's prepared. And if we're not, and you guys have to go someplace else for family reunion, the stress of packing that van with that oxygen machine, with a wheelchair, with the medications, with all those different things that you have to carry with you so that you can be sure to have a positive experience and not run out of battery in the middle of the dinner, and then you can't wheel your loved one back into that van. So you are adding a whole nother level of stress and responsibilities to what you've already having to deal with in the first place. Is there, before I jump into like ways that you guys can manage these things, do you feel like there's any situation that I might have missed that you'd like me to make a note of?
Well, with this wonderful pandemic that we've had,
True.
we've lost a lot of friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
On top of having your spouse with ALS.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been very emotional and hard.
Absolutely. And I imagine when you're experiencing the loss, you're also limited. For example, it's not like you can jump in a plane and fly clear across the country to go to a funeral. If that's, if your loved one is far away. And I think sometimes as well, when we're having to take care of our loved ones and there's so many limitations to that person, how often do we actually get to see our families versus if we were able to meet them in the middle and go visit them, and then they come visit us, and back and forth. So there's also that sense of time lost as well.
Yes.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, it's all right.
I'm wondering, I have to balance taking care of my wife who has ALS with my job. Fortunately, my employer is very open-minded and has given me leeway to do whatever I need to do to take care of my wife, but I still have to take care of my job.
Mm-hmm.
I find that it's very difficult to do, and I'm making a lot more mistakes than I ever made before.
Sure.
How do I cope with things like this?
Mm-hmm. Okay, absolutely. Funny enough, and this is on me, my assumptions, but sometimes you think, well, obviously you have ALS, you must be older, you must be retired, you must be, but the truth is, I do believe that there's quite a few people that have the ALS diagnosis that are in their 40s, that get diagnosed fairly early on. And sometimes it's short-lived, and sometimes it's quite a few years that you're living with that, 6 years, 7 years. One of my patients had it for 12 years. He had ALS for 12 years, which is unheard of. So I totally understand what you're talking about in relation to balancing that, you know, work and being a caregiver as well. I think the first thing that I would consider for each individual person in the meeting is, what kind of resources do you each have available to you? And by resources, you have immediate resources, you have not so immediate resources, you have long distance resources, you have resources right at your fingertips. So for example, do you live alone with your partner? Do you have, you know, obviously you have the support of the ALS Foundation locally as well, but do you have people in your home that live with you? Or are you alone? Do you have family members near the area? Do you have, how is your relationship with places like church, so like friend groups, things like that? And something that I find pretty often with caregivers is that they fall into what I call the caregiver bubble. And it's that these concerns of becoming a burden, or become like overwhelming family and friends, or asking for too much, oftentimes make your whole entire world very small, and you're caught in this bubble of like, it's just you and your loved one. And asking for help seems really, really, really hard, really uncomfortable, because why would you want to impose on anyone else? But a really important part of taking care of yourself and being a productive caregiver is taking advantage in a healthy way, in a respectful way, but taking advantage of your resources. And that means friends, church families, groups that are available to help with this particular diagnosis, things like that. So I don't have, not everyone has their cameras on, but if you guys could please let me know, how comfortable do you find yourself reaching out and asking for help?
Well, our family has put together a bi-weekly Zoom meeting because our family is so spread apart. My nearest daughter lives an hour away. The next one is 3.5 hours, and then the other one is out of state altogether. I do have a son that lives with us, but every other Monday we have a Zoom meeting and we sit and we talk to each other.
Excellent.
Then the daughter that lives an hour away, she takes care of, she's a nurse practitioner, so she takes care of a lot of the information as far as health and medicines and everything else. The other one that lives out of state, she takes care of keeping all the notes of what's going on. And she comes down, she flies down every 3 months to go to the ALS clinic with us. And she records everything that goes on. The other daughter comes down once a month, and she does a lot of cooking for us, and put stuff up. And she's very handy, and she helps to fix things as well. So I feel fortunate in that respect that we do have that support.
Does anybody else have a similar situation where you feel like you can have some support from your family members or friends?
I'm Don Morphesis, not Peggy. Peggy's my wife, but she has ALS. And our family, most of our family is close by, within 45 minutes of us. So we do get quite a bit of help from our son and his wife and our daughter and her husband, as well as our daughter-in-law's mother comes over 6 mornings a week and helps us out, helps me and Peggy both. So we're very fortunate in that regard. But still, I find myself experiencing a lot of that list of 8 things that you mentioned, even with probably as good a support as I can expect. I'm still quite worried.
Oh, we lost him.
My son retired from the Navy,
Getting a
and
little time goes on, but
Oh, he's back.
I don't know. Like you said, go to the hospital. Well, how do you know when to go to the hospital? What happens?
I'm sorry, you cut off partially.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you
Okay.
fine.
My question was, I know you mentioned that having the situation where you have to visit the hospital, have to go to a hospital, and I don't know what would trigger that. What happens that we go to the hospital? I don't know. Not knowing what to expect is kind of a worry for me. I know.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, okay. There's a specific reason why I'm asking you guys about your resources. And it's because there's 2 different things, sometimes a combination, but usually they can present themselves a little separately as well. Either you do not have access to enough resources, or you're actually, the reason why you're struggling to manage your self-care and you're feeling that burnout is more because of your mental, just your worldview and your beliefs of what a caretaker should be doing and how they should be treating themselves. And most of the time what ends up happening is, it seems like a pretty common belief is that, well, I'm the healthy one, so I don't need to be taken care of. I don't need to worry about myself as much. I make sure that they get fed. I don't have to worry so much about feeding myself. I make sure that they get bathed. I may bathe myself, 20 minutes before bed if I remember. I'm always constantly worrying that they get their sleep and they get their rest. But I don't mind having to get up 5, 6, 7 times in the middle of the night. And I'm certainly not going to be selfish, because that's the word, is like, I'm certainly not going to be selfish and take a nap in the middle of the day and leave them. And heaven forbid I leave them by themselves, and that's even worse. So we do have that mental block of like, what is my role in terms of not only as a caretaker, but as a person? What is my role in this relationship with my loved one as a person as well? What is my worth? How much energy am I worth? How much how much time am I worth? Because I don't need it. I don't need it. I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm healthy. It's okay. I haven't been to the doctor all year long, and I have this pain in my back, and I have my shoulder hurts, and but I really am okay. And so sometimes it becomes a matter of not having access to resources. And sometimes it's a matter of you starting to truly believe that you're not really worth the effort that it takes to put in that time for yourself. And again, compounding, let's add on to that the fact that, oh my God, this girl is telling me that aside from the 15 different things that I have to do for my loved ones before they go to sleep, now I also have to have a bedtime routine or a morning routine for myself. I can barely handle getting my loved one to bed at night before I collapse in exhaustion and just like lose myself for 2 hours until we have to get up and fix the oxygen machine again. So it's really difficult to wrap your head around the idea of self-care when every second is so valuable for the care of your loved one. And to spare a moment for yourself seems so selfish, and it seems wrong because you don't need it, because you're fine. Annette, you were going to say something about your son, I believe.
Yeah, my son retired from the Navy, and he is living about 2.5 hours away from us. But his wife, which is the love of my life, is the type of person that she will make sure all I have to do is call her and she'll be right here. So I have been blessed in that way, plus the fact that I have been blessed with my church family, because they constantly are doing things. So I don't know what I would do if I didn't have the time to actually sit down and take a breath, sit outside in the sun for a few minutes to get some sunshine and I think a lot of people don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not healthy for them, nor is it healthy for the family member. Because if you're ill and you're sick or you're exhausted, you can't take proper care of them. So you have to think of yourself. It took me a long time to figure that out. It really did.
And speaking also on behalf of the patients as well, and your loved ones, I know from working with couples, I know the huge sense of guilt that they carry with them, knowing that you're not eating that plate of food, knowing that you're not sitting outside and catching the sun, knowing that you aren't getting the sleep that you need. And they have to carry that, knowing, or at least sensing in their heart that it's because of them.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible burden for them as well. And it's really quite sad, because it isn't because of them, because they have no choice. It's not like they picked to have this condition. It's absolutely beyond their ability to stop or prevent, but that doesn't take away that feeling of like, if only I wasn't around, or if only I didn't have this illness, things would be better.
I think too,
I'm sorry, Nick, go ahead.
I think too, the communication between you and your spouse or the patient, every once, when this first started, it's like sometimes they think that because they're constantly thinking, if they can't move, all they can use is their brain. And I know my husband, that I love dearly, would give me, tell me, okay, can you go do this? I said, do you need anything else? No, not right this second. And then a few minutes later, I'd say, oh, can you get me this? And it's a constant getting up and running. And I told him, I said, look, it's going to make it much easier on you and much easier on me if you would give me at least 15 minutes in between requests so I can catch my breath. And then he realized, what was happening. And I said, I can only be in one place at one time. And I know you can't do this, but I promise, if you let me know, not one right after the other or the after the other, if you'll let me know in a group, I'll get everything done for you. And I'll gladly.
I think, oh, you had something you
I
wanted to
was
say?
just going to say, yeah, I deal with the same thing where,
Yeah.
like I'm getting one thing after another because I need this, I need this, I need this. My question is how do you deal with the patient's frustration about not being able to do what they've always done?
I actually was going to mention, and that's a perfect segue with what I was going to say just now. There is something to take into consideration in all of this as well, and that is the potential changes in the mental health of the loved one as well. And some of the things that present along with the progressive changes that come with ALS are depression, severe sometimes, anxiety, very much. And what sometimes you might feel like demanding, like the person's being very demanding, is just them feeling anxious.
Mhm.
You might also start to see forgetfulness, you might see confusion because of the anxiety, because they're thinking, like you said, they're in their head all the time. And they might even repeat the same request multiple times because they're so anxious about, I can't do it myself. So I'm completely reliant on this person, and I just want to make sure that it gets done. And you see these things more than anything, I think, around the areas of toileting,
Mhm.
medication,
Mhm.
that those areas where they're especially vulnerable and they're especially dependent. They may not be as anxious about, say, for example, uh, what time they end up going to bed or not. If it takes you a little bit longer, then it takes you a little bit longer. That might not be as big of a problem, but toileting is huge because you don't want to soil yourself. That's such a humiliating situation. So thinking, I need to constantly be reminding my spouse, like, hey, don't go too far because I might need to go to the restroom. And if they do go too far, or like if they walk out of the room or they go to do an errand or something like that, and you're staying home by yourself, that fear of like, well, what if I have to go to the bathroom? So some of the things to take into consideration, and this is the reason why um, I actually really, really, really fell in love with working with chronically ill patients, um, was because I started to see how vulnerable you become as a human, and how important having a strong mental health support system it is for these kinds of situations and for these kinds of diagnoses, because essentially all of your coping tools get slowly removed. And that's the thing with ALS, is that slowly but surely. So before you could leave the house, you were upset, you could leave the house, go for a drive, and now you can't. Before you could speak your words, and now you can't. Before you could hear clearly, and now you can't. Like before you could make use of your hands, and you could show all kinds of emotions, and you could do all kinds of things, and you could walk, and you could argue, and you could be angry, and now you can't. And so I there's such a huge vulnerability that comes into play with this diagnosis. So one of the things that I find really, really helpful, really beneficial, is having mental health support. And there's a variety of ways. You can do it through telehealth with the telehealth provider. You can do it through your church family if they provide mental health support. The ALS clinic often does referrals for mental health assistance, but having some sort of a mental health resource for yourself and for your spouse that comes in and educates and helps, especially as the disease progresses, so you have an idea of from the emotional point of view, how are we handling this? Talk about grief. You know, you're grieving everything in this process, everything. You're
Every day.
grieving the loss of the marriage, you're grieving the change of the relationship, you're grieving, you know, the loss of your own freedom and the loss of their freedom. And all of that is happening long before you actually grieve the loss of the loved one. But the whole entire time you're losing bit by bit and you're grieving every single loss. And so having somebody that can come in and can provide coping tools and resources for your loved one to manage the anxiety that comes with that, with the constant understanding that this is a progressive disease, and having somebody that can sit with you once in a while and be like, hey, let's talk about what you're going through. Let's talk about your stress. Are you, you know, how are you managing it? Here's some resources, here's some tools. Let me connect you with some community resources. Having that, I think, is very, very helpful. And I think it does make the process easier because, of course, a mental health provider has different insights into why people are behaving the way they are and why you're behaving differently as well. So now we have two people who knew each other when they were okay. Most of the time, these relationships were there established long before ALS reared its ugly head. So you have two people who were okay at one point, and now the roles have changed and the situations have changed. And something that I find is some of our naturally born insecurities, whether they come from childhood or previous relationships or just life, will start to really manifest themselves in their relationship. So you have fear of abandonment, for example. The person may become almost overwhelmingly needy of attention. They need to have you with them all the time. Whether they need something or they don't, they just want to know you're in the room with them. There's a fear of abandonment that comes along with that. There's also, you know, that lack of self-esteem that starts to develop as well, where like, why is this person even with me? They could be doing so much better by just leaving me. They could have just left me. They could have put me in a nursing home and just left me, you know? And so anything that you or your significant other ever felt insecure about is going to come up during this
I've got a counterpoint.
Go ahead.
Someone mentioned earlier that they'd like to have all of their instructions at one time. I'm a very linear person. So if Sherry starts to give me more than 2 instructions, as a male, I don't think 2, 3 instructions. You ladies are much better than that than we men are. So I asked her, give me 1 instruction at a time, let me deal with that one, and then we'll move on to the next one. And in our case, that's working out very well. We're 5.5 years into this journey, and she still has all of her speaking, breathing, chewing capabilities. Hers is all limb on set. So yeah, I have to do everything for her because she can't move her limbs, but I can't handle more than 1 instruction at a time. Give me 2, I'm gonna mess it up.
I agree.
And you want that little extra time in between too, just for breather.
No, I just say I got through that one. What was next?
Okay,
And then,
good.
And then I'm blessed because she can still watch television or listen to an audio book or something. So I can always get a breather. I just got my booster shot for COVID. It put me on my back for about 24 hours. So I was able to slip off and get an hour nap 2 or 3 times during the day to recover from that.
Good. So The points that I made so far, I always like to go into why we do what we do. So the points that I'm making so far is to explore some of the reasons why you guys may be participating in activities that are not healthy for yourselves, that may be leading to burnout. And again, it comes down to thought process, you know, what you think your needs are you prioritizing your needs? It comes down to old negative patterns that you've had in your life before that are now rearing their ugly head. Whether you're self-sabotaging or whether you're not fully kind of not fully engaging in your self-care because you don't put yourself first and you never really knew how to do that in the past. And it's also, are you becoming more and more restricted by the mental health needs and by the physical needs of your loved one, whether it's because they feel anxious and they need you all the time, or because they're depressed, or because they have this fear of abandonment. So that's basically some of the reasons why you might find yourself struggling to prioritize yourself. Whenever I make a suggestion, and this is a large group, so I'll take feedback and we can tweak it a bit. But whenever I make suggestions on activities that a person can do to take care of themselves and to improve their feelings of burnout, I always like to make it very small. I like to use micro habits. I don't ever really expect a caregiver to have hours for themselves. I expect that perhaps you can carve out 15 minutes or 5 minutes, and using your resources, if need be, then when it comes to bigger time spans, then how can you, in a frugal but efficient way, use those resources to go to your own appointments. If you have to go to a hair appointment, if you have to go to a doctor appointment, if you have to go to the grocery store, et cetera, et cetera. So the first recommendation that I would make to address these is, first and foremost, start to change the internal language. Start working, and this is something you can do just on a day-to-day basis. You don't even have to stop, but sometimes I would have the person visualize like a big stop sign in their head. Whenever you find yourself minimizing your needs, big stop sign. Nope. I have to take care of myself too. It's not okay that I didn't get to go to my doctor's appointment. No, that's not how it should be done. That's not, I do need to do these things for myself, and I should be doing these things for myself, and it's okay to do these things for myself. So starting to change the internal language from I don't need it, or it's not that important, or it can wait, to it's okay for me to have these needs, and it's okay for me to meet these needs as well. So starting to take yourself into consideration, and whenever you find yourself minimizing or disregarding your needs, reminding yourself like, no, I am also important in this relationship, and I also matter, and it's important for me to take care of myself as well. So that's a very simple but really, really powerful thing that you can start doing when it comes to your own self-care. And it's just challenging those dismissive thoughts about yourself, or if you start to have thoughts of, I should have done better. Oh, I did what the therapist told me, and I went outside and sat down in the porch for 15 minutes. And when I went in, I had forgotten that my loved one needed her breakfast or his breakfast. I need to do better. I'm failing at this. I'm never going to get this right. Again, remind yourself, you're doing the absolute best that you can. You're doing the absolute best that you can. And this is not something that she chose, and it's certainly not something that you chose either. And you're both just trying to do the best that you can. And repeating that to yourself, reminding that for yourself on a regular basis is very important in, self-care. Another micro change that you can also make is challenge those negative thoughts of worry. First, you're going to ask yourself, is this something that I can change right now? So whatever the worry is, it does not matter, clear across the board, any kind of worry. Is it something that I have the power to change right now? That's the first thing. Secondly, is this a fact? Do I know this for a fact? And a lot of you guys may worry about, where the disease is going to progress to, let's say, in the future. Well, as you well know, ALS progresses in its own way. And for some people, it affects them one way. For some people, it affects them another. So trying to predict the future can sometimes be very overwhelming, and it can be something that can take up a lot of energy. So challenge that and ask yourself, can I influence this right now? Is it a fact what I'm thinking? Or is this my worry and my anxiety about this disease affecting my thoughts and creating unrealistic, very negative thoughts in my head that I can't control or change or stop? So you're challenging it by, can I control this? Can I change it right now? Is it a fact? And if it's not a fact, because I don't have actual evidence right in front of my face, then admit to yourself, I think I'm just anxious, or I think I'm stressed. And that's probably why it's hard for me not to focus so much on these things that I just can't control. And then once you admit that to yourself, then focus on, I can't do anything about it right now, so I'm going to focus on something that I can control. And so you shift your attention over to something that's more manageable for you. One of the things that I also like to encourage people to do when they're challenging their thoughts and when they're challenging like the negativity is ask yourself, have you met your basic needs? Have you had enough water today? Have you eaten in the last 4 hours, 3-4 hours? Have you eaten? Have you had enough sleep, or at least have you slept at all? Have you had any sun? Very important. Have you been outside, even to walk the dog, even to water the plants? It doesn't matter. Have you been outside? And have you had any sort of social interaction? And whether that's to say hello on a phone call or go outside and wave to the neighbor, whatever it may be. But have you met your basic human needs? Oftentimes, when we do not meet our basic human needs, burnout happens whether you want it or not, because you're depriving yourself of the most basic things. So every day, these 5 things need to be a priority for you, period. That's just the most basic priorities that you need to have. Questions?
Can you repeat the 5?
Sure. So you have food, water, sleep, and I understand sleep is kind of a generalized term, but was last night a particularly bad night? Or were you able to get a couple of restful hours? So food, water, sleep, sun.
Call from XMSL.
Okay. Sun and socialization of some sort. And it can be just a small thing. Also, one of the reasons why I mention your basic needs and going through the list of your basic needs is because our moods change significantly when those needs are not being met. So you are way more likely to ruminate over a problem or a situation when you're hungry, when you're exhausted, or when you're dehydrated than you are when you've eaten something and you've actually had enough fluids.
Bug.
Another aspect of meeting your own basic needs as well is in terms of, like Anthony was mentioning, work. When we talk about focus and concentration, it is very difficult to be able to focus and concentrate when we are hungry and dehydrated and tired. Very, very difficult. So these, again, very basic, but very, very important.
I
Okay,
think
what?
one of the things that I have found,
Speaking of water.
is that sometimes, even if you've had all of the above, you still, and I know men cry like women do. But I try not to do it in front of my husband. I usually will go out and just take a walk, and we have a nice walk path here and a bench where I can actually sit down and cry, because it gets a lot of the emotions out
Mm-hmm.
and makes you able to go back and deal with more. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So when I talk about basic needs, emphasis on the basics, they're the absolute minimum you should be doing for yourself. Absolute minimum. Now, when we talk about additional things, again, we're talking about micro changes.
Yeah.
I agree with you on it 100%. We have to have moments where you open that faucet of emotion and just like let out some of the pressure.
Yeah.
Because what I have noticed, unfortunately, is caregivers who tend to repress their feelings, those feelings transform into other things: frustration, anger, depression, and it's often the loved one that gets the brunt of it, because by repressing the sadness, the grief, the exhaustion, by repressing that, don't think for a second that that just stays in there. No, it's going to come out. It's going to come out one way or another. And it can come out as you yelling at your loved one, or it can come out as you wanting to get away from them, or there's quite a few ways that it'll come out, but very rarely is it healthy. So for avoiding burnout, trying to have pretty regular moments of vulnerability. It doesn't have to necessarily be with your loved one if you don't feel comfortable doing it, or maybe you feel guilty about doing it in front of them. But allowing yourself moments of vulnerability where maybe you're in the shower and you can just sit with your thoughts for a moment and just cry it out. Or if you have one of your loved ones, a family member that you trust. And I always tell people, I tell them, let the person know, hey, I don't need you to fix anything. I'm not giving you a call because I need you to change anything. I'm going to be perfectly okay. I just need a listening ear, and I just need someone that will let me vent without judgment, without me feeling guilty or ashamed. So you can let your family member or your friend or you know, this trusted person know, I'm going to be fine and I don't need you to fix anything. I just really need to vent this out. I'm feeling really, really strung out. I'm feeling like I'm burned out, and I just really need somebody to listen to me. Can you do that for me? And you can do that as well. You can talk to that person, vent to them, cry with them. Another thing that helps as well, if you have difficulty with things like tears, a sign, journaling helps.
Mhm.
So, you know, keeping a journal, couple of passages. Sometimes people don't need to do it every day. They can just do it here and there once in a while, that they just need to write it out, let it out, do a brain dump. That's fine too. But allowing yourself moments where you kind of let go of what you're holding in is very helpful for managing burnout. The next thing, I would say empathy is very important.
Mhm.
So it's just being very patient with yourself, reminding yourself it's okay if I need to take a break. It's okay to ask for a break as long as my loved one is safe and we're okay. It's okay for me to take a 10-minute break or a 15-minute break. It's okay to have bad days. It doesn't make me a bad person if I'm not in, you know, as a caregiver, you might feel this pressure to, like, I have to be the one that's always positive. I have to be happy because, you know, they're the ones that are with the diagnosis, and they're the ones that are suffering. So I have to take on the responsibility of being in the good mood. So reminding yourself to be patient with yourself and to understand it is not humanly possible to have every day be a good day. And to communicate that to your loved one. Hey, I love you, and this is not about you at all. I'm just having kind of a crappy day. I'm having a down day. I'm not feeling my best today. So I just hope you can be patient with me, because I may not be as smiley as I usually am, but I'm still here and I still love you. Any questions about what we've talked about so far? Okay. If you feel like you can't stop, like you have to constantly be doing something, if you feel like you have to constantly be active in some way, that is a trauma response. If you feel when you do slow down that you've forgotten something, or that you're missing something, or that something's going to go wrong because you stopped, that's a trauma response. So understand it is not human per se. It's not expected for humans to constantly be in movement and constantly be doing something. That is not how it's supposed to work. We need, and this can be a situation where literally you're scheduling it. If you got your routine down with your loved one to where you know when you're going to give them their food, you know when you're going to eat your own food, you got everything pretty much set for a routine, then within the routine, there should be 5 minutes here and there where you literally put it on the schedule of like going outside and taking a few deep breaths. Or in these 5 minutes is when I take my pills. These are I schedule 20 minutes for a shower every day. And this is when I do it. And in the shower, something that I find the shower to be an awesome place for self-care. While you're in there, your focus is on yourself. So be mindful of how you clean your body. Be mindful of the thoughts that you're having in that shower. Try to gear them towards positive thoughts, towards you're doing a good job, positive affirmations. You know, what are some of the positive things that happened today? What are some of the things that you feel you accomplished well that day? In 15, 20 minutes, you can do so much work to just, if you need to cry, you cry. If you need to process anything you had to hold back, you process. Do your affirmations. Make sure that you're mindful about taking care of your body. And when you come out, you just take a couple of deep breaths and just like, okay, I feel we're going to be good. We're going to be okay. Do you guys have any feedback in terms of like, does this seem like things that could be believable, achievable? Are these just tasks or self-care techniques that you feel you could manage on your daily life?
Well, I learned it the hard way. I did. And I finally just said to myself, I have to have time for me too. And that took a big leap because I was always worried about him. And, I sat down and talked to him and said, look, I need some time for me. And he said, of course you do, you know? So I look at all these things that you've told us, and I swore that you were reading my mind, because a lot of this I dealt with. We've been dealing with this for probably since 2017, 16, around there. So we've been dealing with it for a little while. And he has made the decision of a DNR. So that took a lot to sit and talk about. And just the fact that we can actually sit down and talk and make decisions with each other. And he's always been my you know, the guy that would root for me for everything, because I had such low self-esteem when we first met. But I kept telling him, I said, what am I going to do when you're not there to say, go get him, Annette? You know, he says, well, you'll hear me say, go get him, Annette. So, you know, a lot of this stuff is good to come out and let everybody know. Yeah.
And, you know, it's quite a bit of the burnout comes from you beating yourself up, or you actually putting yourself in a position of self-sabotaging, or it's just hurting your own body.
Yes.
And unfortunately, for a lot of us, that's actually the way we cope with stress. So a lot of people cope with stress by turning it around and turning it against ourselves, whether that's by ignoring ourselves, whether that's by sabotaging the whatever positive resource we may have. Like, I have had caregivers where I have seen them go through countless caretakers, and I get it. It's hard to find the right fit, but it was always, yeah, but they're not going to do it like I do. Yeah, but it's not the same. Well, I just get nervous. And it's just better if I'm here. So you're doing these things knowing you have a resource that you could be using. You could train this person to do it the way you want them to do. No, they're not going to be you, but you have that resource, but you're sabotaging your chances with them because of that anxiety and that guilt of like, no, it should be me. I should be taking care of them. It's my responsibility.
It's hard to hand it off sometimes, I think, for people. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Was for me too, but I've found someone wonderful, and she's part of our family now. So that's what you have to think about them about. Like they are part of your family.
And, you know, understanding that as people, we have limits, and we need to respect those limits. I'm going to talk a little bit about managing multiple tasks, given that we have somebody that has a job. And then I'll talk about grief before we close up, because we have a few minutes left. First, managing multiple tasks. So how do you manage having a job and also being a caretaker? Super tough. I think when you have a task, one of the first things, you need to focus on completing that task all the way through. Understand you may be experiencing anxiety or symptoms of anxiety if you are not able to keep your focus on a task all the way through. Not, you know, and when I talk about anxiety, call it stress. If the title, it feels uncomfortable, it doesn't and the truth is, can we blame you? Absolutely not. You should be. You should be feeling stressed. You should be feeling anxious. But the point is, know that if you're struggling to keep track of the task, it's probably because you have some issues with anxiety or overthinking, or which are causing you to be maybe forgetful or distracted. So the focus is keep as much to a schedule as possible, and focus on one task at a time, whether that's at work or whether that's at home, and challenge those thoughts. So if let's say that I'm sending an email, but my mind starts to wander, stop. Okay, can I change what I'm thinking about right now? No, I'm at work, they're home. And realistically speaking, I'm pretty sure what I'm worried about, which is whether the winter is going to cause my loved one to get hospitalized. I have no control over that. So put it to rest and redirect yourself back to the task, and redirect yourself as often as you need to until you can complete the task all the way through. So challenging the thoughts comes into play with that. Refocusing and redirecting comes into play with that. Be smart about keeping notes, having one journal or calendar where you keep yourself organized. You have your appointments, you have everyday tasks, things that you need to complete, whether it's for work, whether it's for home, all in one place. When it comes to completing multiple things, especially when you're talking about work-life balance, your organization skills are going to definitely play a role. Are you the type of person that has 50 different calendars and sticky notes everywhere? Or are you the type of person that keeps everything in one place and has a system and understands how the system works? So figure out what works for you to keep you on track and try to be as mainstream as possible. One place for everything is way better than 50 sticky notes all over your desk. So those are the tips that I would give in terms of like a little bit more of a balance, being able to keep yourself organized with that.
I'm laughing right now because I got sticky notes all over the walls and all around me.
Yeah,
I know you, Anthony. And you know what? The stress of having to manage so many tasks will actually have you doing that. You'll have, oh, okay, right. Let me write that down. And you write it down in the notebook that's next to the phone. And then you go to the desk and, oh, yeah, I got to remember that thing. And then you write it on the sticky note that happened to be next to your computer. And you find yourself having 50 million different ways to remember. Again, goes back to that sense of anxiety. I cannot forget. There's so many important things to keep track of. I can't forget. So at the beginning, you may feel yourself questioning and even feeling a little bit anxious about using just one calendar, one journal to keep track of everything. And you can have sticky notes inside the calendar. You can have sticky notes on inside, but keep everything in one place as much as you possibly can so that you don't feel overwhelmed with so many different things to look at. Another thing, now that I'm thinking about it, how's your environment? Are you keeping your environment where you do your work relatively organized, or is it relatively disorganized? Because if it's disorganized, studies have shown that the more disorganized our surroundings are, the more stress and anxiety our brain is going to feel. So bedroom should be tidy. Doesn't have to be super clean or squeaky or anything like that, but keep it tidy. Have a place for dirty laundry, things like that. The areas where you're mostly going to be doing work, whether it's life work, whether it's work, try to just keep it relatively tidy, because that will help psychologically to make you feel like you're actually in control. I'm actually managing this. I can take care of stuff. So you want to trick your brain into believing that you got this. That's a big part of this. We got to trick ourselves into believing we can handle this, no problem. And that's part of it. And then the last thing is obviously the grief. And grief is such a peculiar thing because everyone experiences it differently. And it's different when it's long distance. It's different when it's right in front of you. The one thing that I would say for anyone experiencing this is forgive yourself first and foremost for whatever you weren't able to accomplish. If you weren't able to make it to the funeral, if you weren't able to see that person as often as you wanted to, forgive yourself for that. Focus a lot on forgiveness. And the second thing is, remember that grief is not for our loved ones. They're beyond that.
Mhm.
We grieve for ourselves. We're the ones grieving. They're beyond that. We grieve for ourselves. So remember to focus on yourself and how can I be okay with myself through this process, understanding that I'm never going to be the same, period. This changed my life. And so I am never going to be the same. And I'm going to have to come to terms with that. And I'm going to have to accept that. But through the process of acceptance and the process of forgiveness, how can I take care of my heart so that I can get through this without creating unhealthy grief? Because there is such a thing as healthy grieving and unhealthy grieving. Unhealthy grieving looks like shame. It looks like guilt. It looks like self-sabotaging. It looks like asking yourself the impossible questions. I like to call them the impossible questions because honestly, you're never going to get an answer. Why? The whys. The how, the what happened? What could I have done different? What could they have done different? The what ifs. What if they wouldn't have gone that day out in the car? What if they wouldn't have gone to that particular hospital? What if? Why them? Why me? Why this? That's what unhealthy grieving looks like, is losing yourself in that vortex of impossible scenarios, impossible questions that are never going to be answered. And while you're at it, using that to royally beat yourself down and find it as a weapon to hurt yourself, because somehow you have to make amends for what you failed to do, or what you should have done, or what you did that was wrong. So a lot, there's grief constant through this process. Like I mentioned before, whether it's because of the ALS or whether it's because family members with the pandemic, there's grief left and right all over the place. That happens to be one of the things that you kind of just end up, it's an emotion that ends up becoming such a natural part of your everyday life. And it should, the most important thing is don't use it as a weapon. Do not avoid with everything you have using it to put yourself down, or to doubt yourself, or to question yourself, or to wonder why. Because the why doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter anymore. If the answer to that why would bring that person back, by all means, but it's not going to. When sometimes when I have patients, I did my time at hospice for a few years, and that was one of the most common questions, like, about why. And I would ask the family member, I would be like, let me ask you something. If an angel came down from heaven right now and they stood in front of you and they said, you can have your loved one back. In exchange, I will take you. Most of the time, the person would say, in a heartbeat. No problem. Okay. Sounds good. But do you think it's going to happen? They would say, of course not. That's a ridiculous question. I would say, then why do you keep acting like you can change the outcome by sacrificing yourself? Stop putting yourself in the sacrificial altar of self-destruction and pain and loathing and questioning and judging when you know they're not going to come back. And start working towards forgiveness and towards acceptance, knowing that now your relationship is changing into a different type of relationship. It's more of a spiritual relationship now rather than a physical relationship. So that's on grief, a rather complicated subject. And just to close up, holidays. Do not be afraid to delegate. Don't give that is your gift to yourself for the holidays. Delegate, delegate, delegate. Delegate to Publix, delegate to Walmart, delegate to the church family, delegate to your kids and grandkids. Find as many people to delegate to as you possibly can. If you can, put it out of your hands and delegate it to somebody else. Give yourself that gift and do it. Don't feel bad about it. Don't feel ashamed of it. If you need help, delegate. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. We're at war. We're at work with ALS. So you got to use your tools. You got to use whatever you have. Do you guys have any questions or comments before we close up?
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
You gave me some good insight into some of the questions that I had. And
Excellent.
hopefully I'll be able to deal with them better until next time.
Thank you, Anthony. All right, ladies, should you take it away?
Sure. And does anybody have any questions that you wanted to ask and didn't want to interrupt Lily, or weren't too sure? If you want to, I'll give you a couple of minutes. If you don't want to speak, you can put them in the chat if you'd like. And we'll get back to you with some answers. We'll forward them over to Lily so that she sees them. So does anyone else have anything to say at all? All right, so I'm gonna go ahead, Lily.
You know, one last thing. I found some things that tend to help people are audiobooks and TED Talks. Those can be very helpful. It keeps your mind from ruminating too much.
Mhm.
So whenever you have a little bit of time in those 5 minutes, throwing on your headphones, or even sharing some audiobooks with your loved one, and like just sitting and listening to some audiobooks, that helps. You know, you sit outside, the weather's lovely, or you're out with the dog or something, and you're listening to an audiobook or a TED Talk. These things can be, they're bonding and they're helpful and they're relaxing as well. Music is the other thing. Not only does it create tremendous brain stimulation for patients with ALS, but also helps with mood. So if you're feeling down, throw on some just movement music, Christmas stuff, or something positive, little jazzy, and put on something that will stimulate your mood, and also thought processing and even memory. So those are kind of fun, and they're easy to get a hold of.
Lily, thank you so much for joining us today. I thought that this was really good. I feel that the people that are on seem to have gotten a lot out of it. So we really appreciate you coming on. Again, if any of you have any questions that you may want us to forward to Lily, you can email any of us. I know that You all know your own regional program manager. You can just ask any of us to please reach out to Lily and see if she can answer this question or that. So
Absolutely.
thanks again. And we will keep you posted on what webinar series we have for next year. And if anyone has any ideas of something that they really, really want to see on one of these webinars, please send it to your regional program manager so that we can discuss and see what we can do to meet your needs. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have an amazing holiday season, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
You too.
Thank you. Basically have a turnaround.